Yeah, welcome everybody, and welcome to those that are taking part in the panel as well, Dave and Kate and Paul. Unsurprisingly, that one of the key findings from the survey was that the pandemic sped up transformation. A very small set, it didn't affect them at all, but on the whole, it was that it had sped up. We're talking there about, as we've been hearing already this morning, things taking like a week to put out, things like Microsoft Teams, for example, instead of potentially taking 12 months, 24 months, projects that might otherwise have gone through perhaps a higher level of scrutiny from a financial perspective, getting implemented and pushed through out of necessity rather than out of assessing feasibility in response to the pandemic and the constantly changing situation. And that certainly came back across within the survey results. But what I wanted to do was ask a question, really. So Dave, if I could identify you first. IT, digital and transformation. So one of the questions was, how well do you feel alignment is between IT, digital and transformation in your authority? There was a variety of responses, as we can see from the slide. Some say we are working with it, it's okay, it's a little bit broken, or we're joined at the hip. So the question for you, Dave, is what's your advice on improving departmental alignment to get the best possible transformation results?
So interesting one. I mean, we're quite lucky in Croydon in that we're not just joined at the hip, but various sort of other body parts as well, in that sort of digital IT and transformation is all part of the same department, which is mine. So Croydon Digital Service encompasses all of those things, really. So I actually look after most of the traditional IT bit. Our Chief Digital Officer, Neil Williams, has got sort of mastery over the sort of the web side of things and the digital, some of those digital bits as well. And most of the sort of the change people in the organisation sit within us as well. And to be honest, I mean, and I would say this, wouldn't I? But I do think that's probably the right model for people to go for. I think that the sort of analogy, if you like, that I like to pull is that, or to use, is that these are all different levers that one needs to be able to sort of pull on to be able to make change happen within an organisation. I think alignment is exactly the right word. The last thing you want is your change people and your design people clashing with the IT folk. You've got to make sure that your IT infrastructure is flexible enough and in the right shape to be able to support whatever services want to see happen in terms of change. So having it all under one roof is incredibly helpful. If you can't do that, then I don't know, resign, go work somewhere else. But if you can't do that, then it comes down to finding mutual sort of interest, trying to find the mutual benefit in certain pieces of work. I do think that sometimes there is a ability for, if you like, the digital folk, if we can call them that as a shorthand, they come in with their pointy shoes and their jeans, and they can alienate some of the more traditional IT folk who occasionally, yes, they're a bit crotchety and some of them are a little bit sort of stuck in the mud, but quite a lot of the time that's because they've seen all this stuff go wrong so many times before, and actually they've got an awful lot of value to bring to conversation. So I think there's a thing about not sort of denigrating the importance of things like IT operations and that kind of thing, and actually trying to take those folk on the ride with you. And I think one of the ways that we've tried to do that in Croydon is that when we've introduced sort of new ways of working, whether it's sort of user-centered design, whether it's sort of agile modes of delivery, we've actually tried to apply that to not just to our sort of new, exciting, shiny digital work, but also to some of the IT operations stuff as well, just so that they get some understanding of the benefits of those new ways of working. It means they're a lot more sort of constructive about when we're asking them to support us with other bits of work as well. So I think it's one of those things where all sides of that triangle, the IT, digital, and the transformation, everybody's got a lot to learn from each other, and I think it's about sort of respecting people's knowledge and experience, and but also for everybody to acknowledge where they can learn from others at the same time.
Really interesting. Thank you for that. So we'll move on to the next question for the panel. If I can get my screen to work. There we go. Aligning procurement with transformation. So Paul, I think you're on the session as well. Good morning. So can I ask this question for yourself, if that's okay? So again, you can see there a variety of responses around how procurement are working with transformation as to whether they actively work together to understand the outcomes that is trying to be achieved, or right down to focused on fixed rules and making flexible digital transformation difficult. Quite a variety of responses to that. So I'd be interested to hear, I think hopefully all of us would be interested to hear your thoughts on these outcomes and moving any business case forward, and how procurement and transformation teams can work better together.
Hi, yeah, thanks, and sorry for joining late. In the end, I think what's really important is to have a multidisciplinary team established at the beginning, and it's really important to make sure that the necessary support services are very much seen as part of the process. Everybody needs to understand what's trying to be achieved here and be bought into the outcomes that we're after. And the more that teams like procurement can be encouraged to feel a part of solving a problem, and an interesting problem, the less fixated, if you like, different functions can be on process. I think individuals really need to feel valued, and really need to feel that what they bring to the table is not just their procurement expertise, but their common sense and their desire to make a difference. So I think for me, the key is to think about who needs to be around the table as near to day one as possible, to really look at how to establish what the challenge is, what problem we're trying to solve, and how to do it, and how to encourage procurement colleagues to be problem solvers rather than problem finders, and really think about being used to add value and to create a path to a solution which is as efficient and obviously as compliant as possible. In the earlier days at Ada and Worthing, we worked with our procurement team to use the digital marketplace, G-Cloud as it was at the time, to really think about how to define the problem and the procurement requirement in those terms, to use frameworks like the G-Cloud to move quickly, but to move in a way which was compliant. And of course, that's a new skill set for procurement. So to actually bring them into, if they're not already, into a place where they're starting to learn how to procure digital, and to become experts that can help solve problems. So I guess the message is collaborate rather than leave support services hanging until the last minute, where essentially what they might start to see is risks rather than feeling that they've been there to craft the solution. So yeah, our experience is that they do help, and they are constructive, but if you leave it too late, then it can be a different experience.
So I think it sounds like it's a bit a case of as in all collaboration, taking people with you on the journey, rather than, as you say, bringing them on at the end.
Definitely.
Okay, and so does that mean, just to expand on that a little bit then, so do you think that means that it's necessary for them to understand the service delivery itself a little bit in order to understand what's trying to be achieved?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think some procurement teams will have limited capacity to get involved too much, but of course they should be invited to do so, and maybe in a project, understanding which show and tells or which initial workshops a procurement officer needs to be in, so that they can at least feel like, okay, I know what's going on, and then to define when a good time will be for people to reconnect with the project, so that they can see some of those interim stages, so they can understand the shape of the thing and feel sufficiently in touch with it. But as I say, I think people have got a lot more to bring than their expert area sometimes. So if somebody's really up for learning, then they should be part of the gang.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Thank you for that. Excuse me for just 2 minutes. I've got the dog barking in the background, so just bear with me whilst I close the door. Sorry about this. So thank you for that, Paul. So just moving on to the next question then, and Kate, this one's for you, if that's okay. So the importance of collaboration, which also follows on quite nicely from what Paul was just talking about. So in here, the sense of collaboration was seen by many as critical to success, and that there's a need to share resources. And we know that at Cumbria, you've done quite a considerable amount of collaboration in the services that you've had to deliver. What would you say to those who are not yet in that space, who are not yet prepared to share or to collaborate, or are reticent to do so?
Yeah, well, I mean, from Cumbria, we've been working really, really hard to try and accelerate the way that we share stuff. We haven't always. We've tended to be very much, Cumbria is very special and it's isolated both geographically and whatever else from everywhere. So we've tended to be quite insular in our thinking. And we've tried really hard over the last couple of years to really make a difference in that. So we've been working as hard as we can to talk to people like Dave and to Paul, who now have got their own sharing agreements set up in terms of what they're doing there. And I think we're starting to see the benefits of that. So we've been sharing out with Cumbria more than we have internally within the county. But through COVID, we've really accelerated sharing across districts and also other public and private sector bodies in the county. So the only way that we were able to be as successful as we have been in terms of the journey we were on with COVID and kind of stepping up services so quickly was because we shared and collaborated with Sellafield, and we collaborated with National Rail and BAE, who build nuclear submarines down in Barrow, as well as NHS colleagues on contact tracing. So you have to be open to sharing. I think we've only got limited resources across all of us. Sorry, someone's just trying to phone me in the background. You can get you on so many different forums now. Sorry, apologies. So I think, start to take even baby steps in that direction. We've got a really, really small team in Cumbria. We can't do everything. We can't do everything that we've been asked to do. So the only way that we're going to be able to accelerate some of our projects is to look at what others are doing and try and share our resources. And look at where people have already had successes in delivering projects in areas that we're being asked to look at and see whether we can learn from or share the outcomes that they've produced, and similarly, share what we've done in return.
I think that's right, and I think that certainly from our point of view, we're involved in quite a few different sort of collaborative projects. Obviously, being part of the Netcall community is great for us in terms of sharing, and it's not always just about sharing sort of the apps and things we developed themselves, but it's talking about the how we did it. And some of those sort of underlying things, around what the user story is, what's the data we're capturing, how we're working, stuff like that, which I think is really, really important. There's so much that, there are so many little differences between councils and the way we deliver our services. It's quite maddening at times, but that often means that you can't just sort of take a cookie cutter approach to the way we deliver technology. But actually, some of the underlying stuff absolutely can be transferred between councils. So, I think it's really important to take quite a broad view of what collaboration actually looks like. It's not just about sharing bits of code or whatever.
Yeah, totally. I mean, I think, I came in, I'm probably guilty of being a bit pointy shoes about the whole digital transformation agenda in Cumbria. We sit totally separate from IT, we sit totally separate from transformation. It's been a really hard process for us, and we were guilty of probably a little bit going digital, shiny, new, we're great, change the way we're doing stuff. And we've learned a lot from talking to other authorities about the way in which they've approached digital transformation programs and embedding those practices within the organisation. And we've certainly learned a huge amount in the last couple of years from other people that have really helped us to change the way in which we approach some projects, reframed the kind of narrative around that, and has really helped us to accelerate some of those conversations. So have we cracked it yet? No. Are we taking the steps in the right direction? Absolutely we are, and I don't think we'd be able to do that if it wasn't for the generosity of others in being willing to talk to us. So we're trying to do the same for other people.
Yeah, that's really interesting, and I think you're right. I think there's a tendency, isn't there, historically, to think about collaboration as being very internal, and actually there's a great opportunity there, as both you and David have said, Kate, that to look outside of your own council look at third-party organisations as you have done in Cumbria, or as you said, Dave, about talking to your peers, getting best practice, collaborating with them, designing services together, more of a joined-up approach that benefits everybody. So let's move on to the next question then. So I think what we'd like to do is, so the question that went out was the pressure of additional contact from citizens re COVID-19. Has the organisation implemented any of the following into service areas? So things like chatbots, automation, web chat. Some people weren't sure what was done, or some people were saying none of the above. So Paul, if I can ask you first, how do you think that councils without self-service strategies can survive in this new normal post-COVID, or whilst we're still dealing with it?
I mean, it's more important than ever, isn't it, to have digital services that are as easy as possible for people to use. I know it's a well-worn phrase, really, but if those things are good, then more people will use them. And during COVID, we've seen, haven't we, new groups of people who probably would have never made the switch to digital, and I do so. And that's sticking. That doesn't seem to be changing. Our face-to-face, it remains really, really quiet, and I don't think that's just because of an gradually increasing nervousness again. But people have seen that they can do it, and actually have surprised themselves that they've managed it. Older groups in particular, and actually, I don't think that would have happened, but of course each digital service needs to have been built extremely well and extremely simply for that to work. We've done some stuff around people being able to book appointments, and often they're telephone appointments, but we're seeing that sort of walk-in appointments face-to-face are pretty much gone, so that people always book appointments in advance, and therefore they're ready with their paperwork and whatever else they need to make that appointment work first time. We in Ada and Worthing, we haven't implemented much in the way of chatbots and web chat. I think we probably will, but we're not entirely sure at this stage. We've found the transition to these telephone appointments alongside proactive phone calls out to people and the online services themselves to be meeting the needs of a great deal of people. We have more capacity in the contact centre to do those proactive call outs. But over the next few months, we will be looking at web chat to make the contact centre agents that bit more effective. Not so sure on the chatbot side at this stage, but all of those things will come.
Okay, thank you. And Dave, if I can ask the same question of yourself.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I was going to say, I mean, the interesting thing for us in Croydon, I'm not sure how other local authorities found it, but actually we found that particularly when lockdown started, actually there was no additional contact from citizens during COVID. If anything, the call numbers coming into our contact centre dropped quite significantly because people were just stopping doing most things. Obviously, there was a huge increase in terms of a lot of our outgoing communication, particularly to shielded groups and things like that. So that kind of used up some of that capacity. But in terms of people actually contacting the council, there was quite a significant drop, which was actually quite helpful, for us in a lot of ways. We haven't done. We're a bit similar to Paul at Ada and Worthing. We've not done an awful lot, if we're honest with things. I think we do have some web chat in some areas of our website, but it's certainly not comprehensive. We've done nothing with chatbots or digital assistants or anything like that at this stage. And I think for us, it's because we're still fixing the basics, really, I think it's fair to say. So one of the big projects we've got going on at the moment is a big website rebuild, and there's a technology strand to that, which is around this shared Drupal code base that we're working with a few other local authorities. I think I saw Colin from Bracknell Forest on this call somewhere, so he's a big part of that. So that's the technology side, but on the other side of it is the content, and we're rewriting every single page. We're deleting a hell of a lot of pages, and we're introducing quite a lot of the innovations that the gov.uk website brought in. Not surprising, given that sort of Neil Williams, who used to run gov.uk, is now my boss. There's things like step-by-step guides and things like that, where actually just simply really well-written web content in understandable formats, using this sort of step-by-step guide methodology, actually just has such an impact on the ability for people to find the information that they want themselves on the website, that actually perhaps we don't need some of the bells and whistles that things like chatbots and other things like that might bring in. That actually just really well written, well structured website content is the first thing that you need in place, really. And then when that's done, if it is ever done, then we might be able to look at some of the automated bits as well.
Okay, so basic, making digital services available in the right way, perhaps negates the need sometimes for some of those more advanced technologies.
Yeah, and I think just to answer the question on the slide, how do you think councils without any kind of self-service strategy can survive? Well, I think it's pretty obvious that they can't.
Okay, and Kate, from yourself?
Yeah, so similar to Dave, we're about to kick off a massive website project, and our website is pretty poor, to be fair, at the moment. And we don't want to introduce web chat and chatbots on top of content that's just not good, because we're just going to create more noise and more kind of confusion in the system, I think. So we want to make sure we overhaul that properly first. We have considered it, and we will continue to look at it as part of what we're doing. We have got a couple of virtual workers in Cumbria now who are busy doing shortlisting processes and also looking at accounts receivable. So our invoices that are coming back into the authority are processed first through our low code system, and then virtual workers pick them up and put them into the E5 back office system. So we have started to explore how we can use virtual workers across the authority to do some of the manual processing of kind of very standard data. Early days for that, they've only been live sort of 6 months or so we're still looking at how that's working. But like Dave, I don't think you can't survive that self-service strategy. It's just not possible, both from a customer expectation perspective. People, I think our members are I had a conversation with one of our members the other day. I was like, the people in my constituency, they can't use computers, and it's like, well, some of them can't, but a lot of them can, and we need to be looking at user experience across a range of people's abilities, but also internally in terms of where we are financially, the financial pressures we're facing. We need to be able to push as much for people to be able to self-serve as they can, so that we can free up some of our resources to not have to do the manual work that they're already doing, and free up their resources to do the value adding, for want of a better word, activity. So I just don't think you can do that without having a self-service strategy in place.
Okay.
And just a final point for me on that, I think, having just mulled on it and some of the things that Kate had just said, I think, sometimes we have to be a bit careful about the language we use and the way that we talk about things. So I suspect there's a thing here about it's important for organisations to understand what a self-service strategy probably isn't separate from the design of the service itself from the get-go, if that makes sense. I think there's a danger that people take existing services and then they just sort of slap some kind of digital front end on that so that people can serve themselves without actually really designing the service in such a way that people can sort of interact with it in whatever way that they want to do it. So I think, sometimes it's important to be pragmatic about this stuff, and sometimes a simple digital access to something's really important. But, I think that, considering self-service separately from the design of the service itself, if that makes sense, is probably pretty important.
Yeah, I totally agree. We had a massive discussion about our highways front end, and we're redesigning the way that people interact in terms of front end highways reporting. The conversation with members is, you're the digital team, all you care about is technology, and you're gonna leave people behind if all you're worried about is people being able to report online. And I was kind of, had this conversation with him. It's not with the digital team, but it doesn't mean that we're only focused on the way in which people fill in an online form. That's completely beside the point. We should really rebrand ourselves, rename ourselves something different, because what we're looking at is the whole service end to end and redesigning it in the best way for customers, which may have an online element to it, but that isn't the be all and end all to that service. So really important to make that distinction, try and have those conversations across the authority to make it clear to people that it's not just about, as Dave says, sticking an online thing on a front end of a process or a service.
Yeah, and I think you're absolutely right with that. I think, you know, there's a history, isn't there, around self-service, around the fact that it's, you know, e-delivery, it's online forms, and actually I think you're right. You've got to consider the whole service end to end, and that means identifying the right technology, whether that be Microsoft Teams for a part of a contact, whether it be an online form to capture the information originally, but it doesn't delete the fact that, or do away with the fact that, you know, sometimes a phone call is what's necessary. So let's move on to the next question. So again, for all of you, so this was something that came out that we were quite surprised at, really, in terms of whether back office systems are fully joined up with a front of house self-service style of delivery. So, you know, those that are joined up was a smaller proportion than those that are reliant upon colleagues rekeying information. So, you know, whether that's self-service on the website, whether that is, you know, phone calls, information coming in and then not passing information on through connections. So, so Dave, what would your top tip be to resolving dual handling or rekeying?
I'll jump in first. I think, in a sense, counterintuitively, I've always thought, you know, don't just, obviously that's a problem, but don't try and solve that problem necessarily, if you see what I mean. So joining a front end to a legacy back end and doing all of that work won't necessarily be the best use of your time. Mm-hmm. So it may well be sensible to leave it as it is and work on let's sort this problem out properly. What is front end and what is back end, and is there a service transformation here which gets rid of the legacy system? Now, I know that in many really important cases that is pie in the sky, but in some cases we've managed that. So in waste management some years ago now, we took away the concept of the front end and the back end, and we rebuilt the service so that it all was sensibly operating on one platform. And so looking at the whole estate and trying to join it all together with a nice front end over the top, we haven't done that, and I wouldn't recommend it. I would recommend tactical integrations where they're really valuable, but really question whether this, you know, in years gone by, there's been a huge amount of money spent on citizens indexes and, you know, really joined up data and all the rest of it. Those things break really easily, I think, and the value can be questionable. Some of these things don't go very deep, you know, so the contact center agent doesn't necessarily see loads of useful information anyway. When there's an integration, they still have to swivel their chair and look into the Revs and Bens database in any case. So I would just say, think about it hard before you spend loads of money trying to solve the dual handling problem, and step back a bit and be really clear that that's going to generate a lot of value. That would be my thought.
Dave?
Yeah, I completely agree with what Paul said. You know, that there are some obvious. When one sort of first goes into an organisation stuff, and you start sort of looking around with the supposed low-hanging fruit and all that kind of stuff, double keying of information is often one of those, and there are some really awful examples of it. I remember one council that I did a bit of consulting work with a few years ago. They had their own sort of fully automated revenues and benefits thing where customers could log on and find their digital version of their council tax bill and all that kind of stuff. Now, it turned out what was actually happening in the background was that there was a person generating those bills as PDFs and then uploading them into a sort of a web thing so that people could then go download and look it up. It was absolutely ridiculous, totally hand cranked. But you know, and so there's some of that you just need to put a stop to, and some of it can be really frustrating. The issue is that, and it's a bit like seeing that big lump of green on that pie chart there. I have my doubts about whether that's really that big, that green bit of pie chart, I have to admit. I think, again, there's a lot of this stuff where people sort of say about things are fully integrated and that kind of thing. And it's like, are they really? Because this stuff is so difficult, particularly when you start looking at some of the crustier line of business systems that have been around for a few years and will have been, within local authorities and being used for decades in some cases. Getting data in and out of those things in a sensible format and in an efficient way is incredibly difficult, and you can absolutely tie yourself up in knots trying to make it work. And the other thing is sometimes it just comes down to cost. And actually, occasionally, if you like, the human API is a lot cheaper than the computer one, and it's actually cheaper just to have somebody typing this stuff in on occasion. And so all of those things need to be considered. I think, again, we're probably all going to be in agreement on this. In that I go back to what Paul was saying, which is that rather than sort of going in to fix a problem about dual keying as part of a process, the answer surely is to take a slightly more holistic view, redesign the service from the ground up. And to do that, using the most appropriate technology you've got available to you, by which way you ought to be able to design out the need to rekey information.
Yes.
I think the only other thing I'll just quickly throw in is that this is actually perhaps one of those areas where stuff like robotic process automation and all that kind of stuff can play a role. I'm generally, as I am with all technology, deeply dubious about it. But actually, we have found in Croydon in one or two occasions, and they're relatively small, but on one or two occasions, it was the right thing to do, actually, to use a little bit of RPA to get data from one place to another relatively quickly. It is with the caveat that every time a system gets upgraded in any way, invariably you have to rewrite your robots and stuff to get them working again. So it's not a totally friction-free process. But actually, on occasion, as a tactical thing to do, RPA can help, but it's by no means a sort of a one-size-fits-all strategy at all.
Thank you for that. And Kate, from your side of things?
Yeah, I totally agree with everything that's been said already. And our bit of green is tiny. I'm not ashamed to admit that our bit of green is tiny, and where we've had the success has been in end-to-end service redesign across systems, and the manual rekeying has been a great outcome of it, but it certainly wasn't the thing that drove the service design piece in the first place. It was about making it better for customers and making a much more efficient process, and manual rekeying was a happy outcome. RPA, as I said, we've got a couple of virtual workers going, and it is addressing some issues, but it's still very early days to assess whether that's a long-term strategy that we're going to employ across other service areas, or whether it is going to be very tactical piece of work. There's nothing really much more I can add to what has already been said. I just really wouldn't focus on the rekeying stuff, because you can tie yourself up in knots trying to do that and miss the bigger picture.
Yeah, trying to sticky plaster stuff rather than, as you say,
totally
redesign the process. And if it solves that problem, then fantastic. But putting a digital front end on a poor process doesn't improve the process necessarily.
No, it doesn't.
The only thing I'd add, which probably is more for the previous question, really, and it's hopefully kind of a common thought. Certainly, it's a sort of common currency where we are. It's build something that the customer can use, and then if the customer can't use it for any reason, then we'll fill it in for them. So there isn't anything but a public first facing, way and digital way into the service.
Yeah.
No, that's really useful. Thank you for that. And so I guess lastly, the last question we've got is, as a direct result of the pandemic. So there's three questions in one here, and if I could ask all of you the same thing, really. So, as a result of the pandemic, has your authority changed for the better? Will this change your wider local government community, do you think? And what one key learning could you offer to your peers? Kate, if I come to you first.
Well, my one key learning, I'm going to start with that one, would be don't take on a responsibility for generating income from weddings just before a global pandemic hits. That's my one tip. Don't do that. It's a bad idea. Has my authority changed for the better? I think there are pockets of it. I think it's prompted some better conversations. Has it changed? I'm hopeful. I'm cautiously optimistic that there'll be some changes, and there are some things that I think will stay. But I think that after this initial adrenaline rush that had everybody collaborating around trying to do the right thing, you know, forgetting the day job, forgetting some of the bureaucracy in the right place, has sort of started to trickle back in a little bit. And I was hoping that we might see a bit of a longer period where we were kind of doing the right thing rather than doing the council thing. So I'm hopeful that we'll still have those conversations, but it's not totally changed yet. Will it change our wider local government community? I would hope that it would support, like I've mentioned earlier, about the collaboration internally within Cumbria around projects. I would hope that that would continue regardless of this. I mean, the situation is going to go on for the foreseeable future, isn't it? And I would hope that we don't drift away from some of those conversations that we've been having that kind of really help to push forward the right solution for residents of Cumbria. Will it change wider than that? I would hope that it would help support what greater collaboration, but I'm kind of still a little bit on the fence about whether it's going to have that long-term effect, because unfortunately, will we drift back into our internal financial savings and turn more insular again? I genuinely don't know the answer to that. I'd be interested in hearing what Dave and Paul have got to say about that.
Yeah, Paul, if I can come to you next then. So in terms of those three questions, where do you think your organisation fits as a result of the changes from pandemic?
Yeah, I mean, I think everyone's knackered. Everyone's really tired. That adrenaline rush, it's a long time now, isn't it? And it feels like it's kind of becoming more difficult again. So everyone's really tired. But I think the other thing is that people now know that whatever gets thrown at them, they are really capable of working the problem and doing well. I think we had quite a good collaborative culture already, and a reasonable amount of experience in a reasonable amount of areas about how to work fast and well. But we certainly, like everybody else, I'm sure, experienced that amazing thing, which is everyone agrees to drop their other duties and just focus on one or two things, and the pace that you can work at is incredible. And I think Kate's right, to question, will that continue? But I suppose what it made me think about was, over the last few years, the amount of energy I've put in trying to convince other people who weren't up for it to do something, compared to how great it feels when people are up for it. And obviously COVID has shown when people are up for it, have to be up for it, whatever, you can make massive progress. So I think my learning now, after struggling hard in some areas, would be, work on the problems that people want to solve, rather than trying to force yourself on teams, services that just aren't up for it. And even the ones that say they're up for it and they really mean the opposite, because that can happen. Yes. Really go with the flow, go with the people that are asking for your help. And of course that is contrary to digital teams that have got pressures around savings, potentially. But that is how you can show what it's all about and how to make progress, is to create exemplars with services that are really up for it. And I think that's my learning, is to go back to the COVID projects, to go back to other projects where, when we're all up for it, we can do really great stuff. Yep. So why not do that? Life's a bit too short to be fighting too hard with projects that just are a real struggle because people are trying to resist.
Okay, that's interesting. Thank you. And for yourself, Dave, at Croydon?
Yeah, so has our authority changed for the better as a result of the pandemic? I can only say absolutely not in answer to that question, because it's basically bankrupted us. So, we are royally screwed on the finances, and a lot of that is down to, the response from to COVID and everything. I think it's basically left us about 45 million quid down, which is going to be extremely difficult for us to sort out. Yeah, nasty. But on the positive side, I try and keep it light. The switch to remote working has gone remarkably well, and it's difficult, I think, to see that ever going back to normal. At least I hope it doesn't, because I took the opportunity in lockdown to move about 150 miles away from Croydon. So I'm really hoping we don't have to go back in the office anytime soon. But the speed at which people adapted that, I mean, it's quite interesting. We'd got this just before, in about sort of February time, we'd got this 12-month plan on how we were going to roll out Microsoft Teams across the whole organisation, and there was a little bit of sort of angst about whether we were rushing it, and all of this kind of stuff. In the end, we did it in a week in March, and it was fine. And so I think that there was a thing there about having a little bit of confidence in that actually people can handle quite a lot of change in one go, if it's required. So that's quite a good thing. I think as well, the other thing, purely selfishly from our perspective in our department, is that because we managed to make that happen quickly, because if I'm honest, we were quite lucky in that our IT infrastructure has held up throughout the whole period without any too many issues. Plus we were able, with thanks to the Netcall platform, to roll out some of the apps for COVID that we did, like the shielding database, the business grants, the situation reporting stuff. We got a lot of our internal stock rose quite highly and quickly as a result of that. So that was really helpful for us. In terms of the impacts on local government community, I think Kate had it right. God only knows. It's certainly shown, I think, a lot of the projects and stuff that MHLCLG have funded have shown that it is possible for councils to work together on shared problems. Some of the informal stuff that we're doing between us as Netcall customers show that we can do all of that kind of thing. But the trouble is, we know what happens in local government when the crisis hits, and I suspect that when the finances start to bite everybody else, the temptation to hunker down it will be strong, I would imagine. But I think those of us who know that this kind of thing works need to perhaps go out on a limb a little bit and keep it going ourselves, even if the appetite corporately perhaps isn't what it might have been otherwise. Yeah. The other key learning for me is just don't panic. I think for me, I think that stuff can, bad stuff can happen. Pandemics hit us. All sorts of other things can happen, and we all know within our organisations that that sometimes folk have a tendency to panic, the tendency to sort of demand extremely rapid action on certain things. And that invariably rushing stuff doesn't help anybody. And that important thing about taking a deep breath, making sure you take the time to fully understand the scale of the problem and what a proportionate approach to tackling it might be is really, really important. And so, the key learning or the key skill, I think, that's really sort of served me and others well during this time is a sense of perspective.
Fantastic. Thank you very much for that. So that's the end of the panel questions from us. There's an opportunity now, Nick, for any of the other attendees to ask any questions if they would like. Other than that, all it takes for me is to say thank you to people for attending, and thank you to Kate, Dave, and to Paul for taking part of the panel. And Nick, I'll hand it back over to yourself.
Do we have any further questions from anyone? If anyone would like to unmute themselves, and do we have anyone that would like to ask any questions of our wonderful panel at all?
Hi, Nick. It's Adam Kane from Leeds City Council.
Hi, Adam.
I put something on the web, or the chat bit here. I think a big thing for me would be if anyone has found a way to get some real intelligence about what happens on the website and how many people have successfully done what they want to do and how many people actually have just ended up going to the phone or email. But I don't know if anyone's found any clever ways of sort of gathering that data, that insight.
No. I think
suspect so.
There's two answers here, isn't there? There's the sort of the quantitative one, which is getting your Google Analytics set up right, which I dare say probably no local authority probably has, in terms of tracking those journeys and doing all that kind of stuff properly. And then there's the qualitative thing, which is you're doing your user research, isn't it? And trying to get a reasonably representative sample of people, give them some tasks to do and watch them do it, and see how they get on, and then perhaps try and extrapolate from that. But both are pretty imperfect, I think.
Won't Soccer Team have a paid-for service for this at some point? Possibly.
They may well have done.
Yes. Paul, Kate?
No, we haven't cracked that at all. Sorry, I can't offer any help there. Well, it's one of the banes of my life is the lack of website analytics. The stuff that we have got tends to be, anything that's kind of qualitative is very much a complaint about a service, not necessarily the website. And they use it as a way of saying, I'm not getting the service that I want. For I'm sure those two things are interlinked. I'm not trying to separate them out too closely, but yeah, we don't really get very much at all, and it's one of the things we're looking at for our new site.
Yeah, the same for me. The only shout I would give out is for Citizens Advice, who seem to be doing some amazing work with analysing hits on their website. So check them out, because they're making, they're telling stories with their data in a way which I think is really, really interesting.
Yeah, thanks, Paul. Hopefully we'll see you at some future sessions, but I'll bid you all a farewell. Have a good day, everyone. Take care.